You good?
I think so.
Sure.
No. Ahoy hoy, and welcome to the first ever episode of Let's Talk, your soon-to-be favourite Formula One podcast that mixes high-speed motorsport with diversity, silliness, and excitement. Each episode will dive into the crazy world of F1, on and off-track drama, share our love and passion of the sport, and discuss and build bridges to diversity and LGBTIQA plus representation. And we also rate our tops and bottoms of the week, with a fitting toot or a boot. Throughout the season, I'll be joined by my Formula One loving friends to get their takes on the racing world's current events. And joining me every episode to help me push the buttons and to make me sound as good as I am, a longtime friend, Aaron Best. Now say hello to our new and adoring fans.
I'm very excited for our new show.
It is exciting, isn't it? A podcast where two gays get to talk about Formula One. It's crazy, literally, that we thought about this a couple of months ago, and now we're here recording our first episode. So Aaron, you and I have watched every race together for the last few seasons. What brought you into F1?
Well, I come from a pretty big motorsports family. I grew up with my dad being really into the V8s and watching Bathurst. It was a big event at my house every year. But I'm actually fairly new to Formula One. I got into it because of your passion and living with you and our friend Bryce and shows like Drive to Survive. But you're a much more long-term fan, yeah?
Yeah, very long term. Getting ready for this episode, I was kind of thinking back a little bit to when I kind of first had my first time for Formula One. And funnily enough, I've actually got you this picture. You're going to probably laugh about this, but I'm just going to hand this over.
So I currently have a very pixelated photo.
Hey, it was scanned in. Like, give my dad some credit here, right?
But you can tell it's Shaun because the ears are supporting his baseball cap.
Baseball cap, yes. I think it was a Formula One racing hat. I can't tell because it is a pixelated scan. But we're going to chuck this photo up onto Instagram so listeners can actually enjoy the image that is this. I'll tell you a little bit about this whilst we're in auto format. It is a picture of me looking very cute in flannel next to my younger brother and my cousin. So this is in the Melbourne Grand Prix. I assume this is very 1999 looking, do you think? I think the flannel's the giveaway here and the double denim.
The outfit was a choice.
Again, maybe this was my mother's choice in terms of dressing this up, so that's absolutely fine. It's in front of an 80s looking Ferrari. And this is at the Melbourne Grand Prix. So when you are walking around the ground, you're normally seeing these gorgeous array of cars whilst you're also hearing the high-pitched V10s. I think of those days. Why I wanted to bring this photo and show this to you, Aaron, was the fact that this is that core memory that I kind of have of F1 was experiencing this with my dad. I think that's where my passion for cars came out in general. And I think with Formula One, it was adding the element of speed, aerodynamics, and, hearing the noise. That plus also now this cool team dynamics and hearing a little bit more about those team stories and management and, of course, the leaders that lead these Formula One teams. I think that's why I love it.
Yeah, for me, it's the strategy of every race, like how different drivers react to different scenarios. For example, things like how getting a tow but being caught in dirty air is the same phenomenon, just at different parts of the track, whether you're on a straight or whether you're on a corner. And so how different drivers perform differently in the same car with separate strategies, how different teams decide to undercut each other and all of those kind of like strategic decisions that go into a race. It's not just do laps of the track.
Unless you're Ferrari, basically. Speaking of strategies, we're seeing a lot of strategic decisions being made off the track already this year, like a lot of drama and a lot of silliness. This year's really kicked off a bit of a bang. We have Hamilton moving to Ferrari, Leclerc and Norris announcing contract extensions, the ousting of Gunther Steiner from Haas, and now allegations of misconduct against Christian Horner.
I'm super interested to see how much of what we're seeing now may have been foreshadowed or literally outright discussed when we see Drive to Survive in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, especially because Gunther was like one of the key pillars, especially from a team leader perspective for that show. So it'll be interesting to see if there were any kind of signs about maybe his lack of management potentially. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see if we see things like Ferrari making moves on Hamilton mid-season, if anything comes out of that, and what kind of pressure you see on drivers like Russell, Perez and Ricciardo. Drive to Survive is getting released later on this month, so I'm definitely looking forward to having a bit of a talk with you about it. But for now, let's have a conversation about the car launches this week. Over the past week, we have seen Haas, Williams, Stake Sauber, Alpine, and Visa Cash App Red Bull, Racing Bulls, RB. It's convoluted, but yes, those are the cars that have basically released all their liveries. So today we're going to be talking about each car, comparing them to their previous design, and learn a little bit about how the team has been focusing on for 2024. What changes have they made in terms of direction, and seeing if they're going to have new challenges I'll have to tackle.
We'll also be giving our opinions on the cars and for each whether we think it is a toot or a boot compared to the year before. So let's kick off in the order that they were released with Haas.
I don't mind Haas. I think Haas as a team probably needs to kind of figure out what they're bloody doing, especially coming last or at least underperforming over the past couple of years. But looking at the car and seeing differences with what they're doing pretty much looks the same. They have gone from a black and white to black and white. There is a bit of red in there. They've still got their sponsor MoneyGram. It's not much of a change by the looks of it.
For me, the interesting thing is the fact that they've gone from much less white, and a lot of teams, as we will discuss, have gone for a lot more carbon fiber and black. And I wonder how much of that is to follow suit. Because I remember Mercedes doing it a couple of years ago and everyone kind of being like, oh, well, how much does the paint weigh? Have they saved weight in the car? So I wonder whether other teams are now going, you know what, let's just have a black car.
Yeah, Formula One is a mixture of that engineering, aerodynamics and speed, right? But as you can see, and as we're discussing, it means that there's not much to these cars, especially when we're thinking about when they're driving past you pretty quickly.
The one thing that I do appreciate for this year is in every race last year, I could not tell if it was a Haas or an Alfa Romeo. And the fact that there's no more Alfa Romeo and there's only one white, black and red car out on the track.
It makes it much more easier, doesn't it? It makes it much more easier. I do think, again, looking at sponsorships and everything there, these teams, especially over the years, have gotten a lot more profitable and you're seeing a lot more investment coming on in. So even just having a look at the comparison between the 2023 front of the car and 2024, you can just see that there's some prominent sponsors on there. Again, it just showcases a little bit more of that people wanting to invest into F1, especially for the showcase and the entertainment that it is providing.
Their car also is looking a little bit more mature. The car from last year is quite boxy. The car from this year feels like it's got more aerodynamic. It looks like they've borrowed from other teams a little bit more as far as their side pod designs and things like that. It feels like they are becoming a bit more of a contender team this year than what their car looked like last year.
Yeah, and again, there is a relationship between Haas and Ferrari, right? So Ferrari is that team that manufactures the entire car, so every nut, bolt, engine, etc. And Haas is like a customer team, so they buy a lot of Ferrari's packaging and those parts. So they have very much been influenced by Ferrari over the years. And that's why you're kind of seeing a little bit more of that kind of contender in there. They have been shaping and using a lot of the Ferrari parts, but also adding that element of what's been doing well on that Red Bull car there too. So we're seeing this across the board for all these livery and car releases so far this year, but there has been a lot more focus on that Red Bull design, especially when we're talking about side pods, but also with the sculpting of that front wing there too.
Moving on to the next team that released their livery was Stake/Kick/Sauber. Too many legal dramas to go into why they can't keep their name. But so former Alfa Romeo, now known as
Sauber. I think it's just easier. Like Sauber has been around for years. It's kind of that legacy team, right? But as we're seeing with a lot more, again, entertainment, more people watching, there's a lot more sponsorship opportunities. Hence why now we've got this Kick, Stake, Sauber weird name coming on through.
I actually do like last year we had a lot of red cars out on the track with Ferrari, Haas and Alfa Romeo. To now have a black and bright green car, we haven't really had this kind of green that I can remember. We've had the Aston Martins, but that's obviously that Aston Martin teal.
Like that racing kind of colour.
Whereas this is a bright green. I also liked in the Sauber car launch that they went slightly different to what everyone else did. Everyone else had their car in a showroom with a giant LED background, whereas Kit went with this very Tron-looking wind tunnel kind of reveal as the car was raised up onto a platform. It was actually different to the way that all the other cars have been released with, as I said, that kind of showroom, lights, LED screen.
Yeah, I also think there is an element here that a lot of these are now digital releases there too. So I feel like they heavily lent into digital first, make it very shiny. I'm very interested to see on what actually might get changed when they actually go and release the car and do first practice testing. Again, it looks amazing in terms of the color. I think the light but electric green is really interesting. But yes, I think from an overall visual package, it's the most strikingly different, especially compared to last year. And that comes from the whole name change. So Stake have a number of different ventures, but I think the biggest one is casino, gambling.
A crypto gambling.
Got you. So again, previously it was Alfa Romeo, so legacy car brand. This is an in-between moment for them, right? So this is 2 years of this branding before they then move into Audi. So again, it's an interesting kind of color to come out with. But as you also then touched on, it is a lot of black. You really can't see much else. It's just that striking kind of striped green on the front of the wing, down a bit of the middle, and where the engine cover is.
Obviously, this is something that is becoming contentious for them because they can't be seen to promote gambling, particularly in, I think it's Switzerland and Australian markets, that they have a problem with their name. And that's why they kind of will be going with Kick. But what I find interesting about the way they're doing their branding is Stake is written on the car a dozen times. All their other brands are just in the green strip along the side pod, and they are tiny compared to the Stake brand. Like Stake used to be on the Alfa Romeo, but it was on the very side of their front wing. It wasn't a prominent logo. Now, the only logo you really see on the car is Stake. All the others are hidden, which I find interesting.
The amount of times that you have now said steak and now I just actually want a steak and some chips is, this is where I'm going. I think lunch is about to come upon us and I'm very now hungry. I think from a technical aspect here, again, everyone has been leaning towards that kind of Red Bull performance package. So that means this car has changed up a bit from last year. So they have adopted the suspension of what Red Bull has been doing over the past 2 years to hopefully give it a bit more aerodynamic stability. And again, similar to those side pods, so those inlets at the side of the car have gone very much similar to what Red Bull has been doing. So again, they've been kind of slightly copying, but also trying to fit into the same package within there too. Again, we're seeing a lot more of that. You're going to see that quite a bit. It's going to be interesting. I think the visual aspect of this car is fascinating. It's not the worst name change when we're talking about another car that will be a little bit later on today. But yeah, it's a very interesting kind of car.
All right, moving on. We have Alpine with 2 new cars.
2? Are we counting it as 2?
Well, they released it as 2 separate liveries.
Okay, so with Alpine, with their liveries, because of their big sponsor, BWT, they either heavily lean into the BWT sponsorship branding, which is pink. But traditionally, again, Alpine is this kind of racing blue, right? Alpine's that French brand, an offshoot of Renault in terms of their sporting car brand. So yes, they kind of flip in and out in terms of either going with a very pink car or a very blue car. And we have seen that a couple of years now, so it's kind of nothing new. But yeah, tell me a bit more about your thoughts on now what we're seeing for 2024 and those kind of color changes.
Again, we've got another car that's going very black. So they've now gone from being blue with pink accents to black with blue accents or black with pink accents. So I think it's 16 races of the season they're going to be driving the blue car and 8 races they're going to be driving with the pink livery. I personally like the pink better than I like the blue. I think the pink stands out more. The pink kind of feels a little bit more like them. The blue livery kind of is giving me a little bit like, we look a little bit too Williams.
Yeah, I get that. It also gives me kind of that flashback to, it was after Force India, and I think they were Racing Point at that stage, and they kind of coined the car of the pink Mercedes, right? Because they also borrowed a lot of parts from Mercedes back in that kind of time. So to have a different, unique color is always quite interesting to see on the grid. It just means that you can kind of pick that car out pretty quickly. But as you talked about there, it is just a dash of pink and a dash of blue, really, to a very black car.
Yeah, it's mostly just across that front of the car down either side. It goes either blue or pink. That's probably the biggest change that you'd notice. But as I said, I personally feel like the pink is a better look than the blue. But I do like this car design better than last year. I think the candy blue from last year is a little bit too immature versus this one that just feels a little bit sleek, a bit more contemporary.
Yeah, I think personally for me, what I like about this car is we're seeing a lot more of the teams with their aero wheels. So the wheel itself has a little bit of an aero cover, again, just kind of smooth over the wind when you are going very high in terms of speed. I kind of like the fact that you've got the blue at the front in terms of the aero cover, but you've also got the pink at the back. I think that's kind of a nice difference instead of just having them as black or one color that we've kind of seen on some of the cars so far.
Their car's shape, I think, it just feels like it's going to be a little bit more aerodynamic. It's got a wider surface area at the front for wind to travel over the top of it. The front wing looks like it is larger and flatter than previous. So it'd be interesting to see how well they do. They did quite well last year.
Even with all the dramas like they had internal with personnel changes, team leader gone.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how well they stack up in the midfield this year.
Yeah, and I think even their kind of presentation of the car too, it felt a little bit more mature when they were talking about it. There were a couple of new figureheads, I think, from a Renault company perspective that were there. So again, I don't know if that's going to mean that there's going to be more focus from the big corporate brand on this team to perform well, or they're going to give the F1 team its own autonomy to just be doing what they need to go and do. But again, from a technical standpoint, everyone has just been trying to figure out on how to balance out their car a little bit better in that similar vein that has meant that Red Bull car has done so well last year. But again, we kind of didn't get a lot talking about this in terms of the big structural changes, unlike the two previous cars that we just talked about. But again, I think they've just been really focusing on just making sure that that air is going through into the side pod correctly to cool down the engine, and just to make sure that they were trying to get as much efficiency out of the package that they've got.
The next car that we're going to look at is Williams. I do have to say this is probably my favourite livery so far. I feel like since their rebrand a couple of years ago, they've now come into understanding how they can use that brand really well, how they can tie it into the way the brand has existed for a long time with your slight hints of red and white throughout the body of the car. But they're using their blues really nicely. I still cannot stand the fact that they've got a Duracell battery sitting on top of the car.
I kind of love it. I really do. From a branding, marketing perspective, I love the integration there.
But I do think they've gone darker for a lot of their blue, but they haven't gone black.
I feel like there's still a lot of black. Like if you have a look between the 2023 car and 2024, but I think even funnily enough to the 2023 presentation of that Williams car, they also stripped out a lot of the blue halfway through the season too. So again, this whole weight saving thing is very important to make sure that the car is doing what it needs to go and do within the weight requirements. I do think, yeah, it's a very smart looking car.
Yeah.
The thing that I've really loved about this F1 livery release has been the side branding on the car. So there is a brand on there called Komatsu. They're a Japanese mining company. Now, the memes that are coming out of this has been from the fact that Haas has got rid of Gunther Steiner for Ao Komatsu, who is now their new team leader. So Haas have just kind of gone in and made a little bit of a mockery about it, going, why do you have our team leader on your car? It's quite funny.
Williams did not respond to that tweet.
What else are you going to go and do, really? Like, I think it's just, again, quite funny on how things really worked out. But yes, I do find that it's a very smart looking car. And I'm very excited for Williams. They did so well with the packaging of last year's car. Basically, with 2023, they stopped tinkering and adding updates to the car, I think halfway through the year. Alex Albon basically took that car and did the best that he could. And he was always, at least probably from a qualifying perspective, within that top 10 most of the times. And I think that was really exciting to see.
It's going to be very interesting to see how Alex in particular does this year. He was a standout last year. You pretty much didn't have a race where they didn't mention how good he did in qualifying, at least. There's already talks with everything that's happening with the current pre-season silliness about what will happen to Albon in 2025. Obviously, Williams normally graduate their drivers up to Mercedes.
Yeah, George Russell, right?
But apparently Red Bull are trying to seek an option for Albon's 2026 season. So that'll be interesting to see. I do think Williams are kind of returning to the golden age of Williams racing. They are one of the oldest teams still in the F1 grid, and they had such a dominance in like the early 90s, I think it was. And since, unfortunately, the Williams family is no longer part of it, they are starting to come back. So it'll be interesting to see how well this car does and how well, in particular, Alex Albon does this year.
Yeah, it was, especially in my family growing up, right? I was a Ferrari kid and my brother and my dad were Williams, right? So again, it was always red versus blue, especially in that kind of time frame there. Looking at the technical aspect of it, based on reading through news reports, etc., there was not a lot of conversation about what had technically been changed on the car. Again, you can see that kind of influence and direction with Red Bull and where they're wanting to go with that. But I have been hearing that Albon has had to change his driving style for this new car. So again, they must have done some serious work to change and maybe balance it out a little bit more. Instead of it just being super quick as a qualifying car, which it was, maybe it's given it a little bit more of a balance and he has to drive it a little bit differently. They get to go and do simulator work with the new vehicle. There's not actual testing that's been done physically in the car as yet. That's going to happen very soon. But yeah, that's going to be very interesting to see on how that Albon takes this new package and makes it work.
And so our final car for today is the Visa Cash App RB Red Bull.
I think it's Racing Bulls. But again, see, this is the whole thing, right? So previous to that, they were AlphaTauri, right? Nice, easy, blech, it is what it was. But now you've got Visa, Cash App, RB, which we're not even unsure if that is basically Red Bull because it's a sister team, if not a closely tied team to the Red Bull team, or Racing Bulls. So I've been hearing, and I don't know if what you're going to think about this, Aaron, where we say V-Carb.
I'm refusing to say V-Carb.
It sounds like a pre-workout situation, right? It just sounds a little bit silly. Or we just call it RB, right? Just to keep it simple because it is just a mouthful. And to be honest, it's my least favorite in terms of the branding changes that have gone on so far. Sponsorship's a big thing and you need sponsorships to run these cars. And adding in these principal sponsors in your name has always happened. Mercedes is AMG, Petronas, Mercedes, F1 team. So it exists, but you always come back to at least a brand, right? And this team has been devoid of brands since I think came from the Toro Rosso days. What's your thoughts on the livery and the car itself?
I'm not a huge fan of this livery. 2 reasons. One, I don't like the colours. The colours just kind of, for me, feel very... They went to a marketing agency and said, what colour should we paint a racing car? And they're like, well, this royal blue and this red, they'll go fast. I also think because the brand's in the name of the team and it being such a contentious issue, you focus on how many brands they've actually stuck to this car. Like the Haas car probably has just as many stickers on it as this one does. But this one, you can't look past them. There's very few spots on the car where there isn't a logo. It just feels a little bit too much to me.
I actually like it. and hear me out, right? I think all the points are valid, but I actually love that this has actually got paint on it. We'll soon see, it may be stripped back. Again, they had a release, it was live, I think this one. So they had drivers there, etc. And the car physically there.
Las Vegas.
Okay. So again, this kind of focus on that American market, right? I love the fact that there is color. I love the fact that it's kind of given me old school Toro Rosso, coloring with that kind of...
It does look like a Red Bull can.
Yeah, it reminds you of a Red Bull can. So I think it's kind of fun with that aspect. But yes, you can definitely see that, Visa Cash App, again, I think they're a product of Visa, right? Definitely not an Australian thing from what I could tell. This, again, is very prominent with its Visa logo on that side part of the car and that kind of cash app, wherever you can kind of place it, really.
It'll be interesting to see how the team performs this year. They had a bit of a rocky season last year when they had Ricciardo come in and then be out for a good portion of the season when he hurt himself.
Yeah, taking on the rookie, Nick de Vries also, and that not working out, which led to Ricciardo too.
So this year, having Ricciardo and Yuki as a pair for the entire season, hopefully nothing happens that either of them have to sit out for any races like last year. So it'd be interesting to see whether they can build some momentum and start to bring themselves back into the midfield a little bit more. I also am looking forward to seeing Drive to Survive, the two of them interact, because example, like watching Yuki and Pierre Gasly from the season before, I just thought was so cute, their little bromance. So I can't wait to see Yuki and Ricciardo interact on Drive to Survive. That'll be hilarious.
I wonder if they actually had a lot of time to kind of interact, especially with Ricciardo then being out for like a good 3 to 4.
I think he was
races.
still traveling with the team. So he would have still been there and he would have still been in the garage and watching what's going on. But I'm interested to see the dynamics of those two as drivers. Ricciardo is a great personality in any team that he drives for.
Yeah.
He's marketing gold. So it'll be interesting to see how he goes with Yuki. A scene from last year's drive where he and Pierre were talking about the fact that Pierre was leaving and Yuki cracked it at him. He's like, "You're leaving me."
I think it's like, again, that highlights that cute bromance between the two of them, really.
So I'm interested to see that. I'm interested to see how well the team goes this year when they do have a full year together. But like I said, I'm not a huge fan of this car. It just feels a bit cheap to me.
I like a cheap Red Bull car, right? I think it's quite good in terms of the colour. We'll soon see if, they start to strip it back, like with the rest of the liveries that we have seen, especially to save some weight. But Aaron, what's your thoughts on, there is a lot of news, especially now with closer ties to Red Bull, not only from a production perspective. So again, they're borrowing a lot more parts from that team. They're also going to be in the same space in terms of a location where the teams are manufacturing and working on the design there. But this is basically just going to become a Red Bull copy and could be an absolute obliteration of the midfield and put them up to second. What's your thoughts on hearing some of that kind of as news?
For me, I've always found it quite interesting that they talk about AlphaTauri or Toro Rosso being the sister team or the junior team of Red Bull and them just not competing anywhere near the way that Red Bull does. And it's always been a little bit of, well, what benefits are they getting to have such a divide that they weren't competing for the midfield at some points in the last couple of years? So exactly how much support were they getting from Red Bull? So if that's changing over the next sort of 2 to 3 years, it'll be interesting to see where they end up.
Yeah, I think some of the team bosses are a little bit more concerned about this, especially because it kind of takes them out a little bit, that they've got this more closely knitted team that they maybe could be able to run experiments or something like that. Again, part of agreements, you can't, if you are a customer team, which again, this one is BR to Red Bull. My head's now exploding on how to say Red Bull, Red B. Red B. Wow. Anyway, there is a lot of that conversation going on with those team bosses going, it's probably too close and there needs to be probably a look into that. As a fan, you probably want to go and see a team that comes out of the midfield and battles it out with Red Bull, right?
The entirety of last season, we watched 2nd to 12th with a lot of excitement.
Yeah.
Max Verstappen was 30 seconds ahead for the majority of a race. So we didn't really pay any attention to him.
Yeah.
So, yes, if we could get a team that could compete with Max, it wasn't Red Bull necessarily, it was Max and Red Bull.
Yeah.
If we can get someone who can compete with him, great. And we potentially have that this year. Obviously, McLaren are doing a lot of work. Mercedes have done a lot of work. So it'll be interesting to see how that happens. But I do enjoy the fact that we are seeing a really competitive midfield and the midfield is expanding. There's a lot less top of the field and a lot less bottom of the field. We've got a very big midfield at the moment with a lot of competitive teams.
Yeah, I think that's the most exciting about this whole era of F1, right? Yes, Max took it away, and to be honest, his goal should be to win every race now, and he might just. But I think that whole midfield, whether we call them midfield and back markers anymore, is completely out of there. It is just so exciting to see these teams really give it a go. And as you said, from all the way second to those last bits of points, it is hotly contested by all these teams. And if RB is able to maximize their relationship with Red Bull to be a bit more competitive, I'm happy to see it. But of course, it shouldn't be as detriment to the other teams if they don't have that kind of sister team to go and do this stuff with.
So before we finish up, we'll go through each of those teams and whether it for you is a toot or a boot. Okay. So Haas.
Toot?
As a toot for me. I like the Haas car. I like moving away from the white to a black car feels a little bit more contemporary. Williams.
Oh, absolute easy toot. Because of the Duracell battery, I still love that. I think it's the best part.
I think Williams looks really contemporary. For me, yeah, definitely a toot.
I also think there's excitement with Williams.
Sauber.
I like the green, but I kind of maybe the whole branding situation's a boot.
I like the car. I have a soft spot for Tron, the movie franchise. So for me, it's a toot. Alpine.
Boot. I say with the... I don't think it's going to be enough.
For me, the blue livery is definitely a boot. I am a little bit more inclined to go a toot for the pink livery, but it's only going to be in 8 races. So based on the blue livery, I'm going toot.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, Visa Cash App RB.
I'm giving the design of the car the toot.
It's a boot. Like I said, I think this design is too busy.
Yeah. I like it because it's like old school Toro Rosso, but we just know it's going to be stripped back. So next week we have Aston Martin, Ferrari, Mercedes, McLaren and Red Bull all releasing their liveries. Tune in because we're going to have a bit of that same conversation that we've just had today, our thoughts on the cars, learning a little bit more about the technical side of things, and of course giving them a bit of a toot and a bit of a boot. All right, that's it from us today. Don't forget to subscribe to Let's Talk wherever you get your favorite podcasts. We'd love for you to give us a rating or follow us on our socials, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. See you next week.
Let's Talk is hosted, produced, and edited by Shaun Polidano and Aaron Best. Our show is an entertainment podcast, and the views expressed by the host and guests are meant for entertainment purposes only. Let's Talk is recorded in Paran in Naarm, Melbourne, and we would like to acknowledge the Burrarong people of the East Kulin Nation, the traditional owners of the land, and pay our respects to Aboriginal elders past, present, and emerging.